This is SWTN.
Was with the Army Reserve from 1973 till about 1995. Became involved in the military because I was in college during the Vietnam War. Not a very popular time to be involved in the military, but as part of the briefing, getting ready to go into college, I remember distinctly we had a NCO from the ROTC program come by to talk to everybody. And one of his points was that, okay, Vietnam looked like it was going to go on forever. There was no end in sight. He said you had two choices. You could go in as an enlisted. You could go in as an officer. If you want to make a big difference, you go in as an officer. Your choice. And frankly, I'd never thought about it before, but I could see his point. Even though I knew very little about the military, I understood what he was getting at. And thought about it. And decided to go for it. I was not very popular when I was in college. I started in 1969, was Army ROTC, and as I put it, the day without being spit on is a good day at that time, if you're obviously in the Army ROTC. To my surprise, I quickly realized that there was a wide variety of students that were in the program. Everything from ultra-conservative to ultra-liberal, all points in between. But we were all trying to achieve the same goal, to become a viable person that could do a job in the military. Of course, to do that, we had to understand what the military was all about. And I had in my mind, some of the most phenomenal instructors because they were literally just home from Vietnam, had extensive experience, officers enlisted, and they didn't hold anything back. They made it quite clear what it was going to be like from their perspective. One of the things that was pointed out to me is if you choose to go active duty and make a career out of it, you'd better get used to moving every 2 years, max. No ifs, ands, or buts. Doesn't matter what your family situation is. If you have a family, if you don't have a family, the impact it has on the family, you'd best be prepared to move every 2 years, not just down the street, somewhere else on the planet. So they were quite honest about it. And one of my instructors, I remember, was Lieutenant Colonel, just getting ready to retire. And his thing that he was looking forward to the most was being able to buy his own home. In the military, if you had, you were given a housing allowance. And typically you were given either on-base or off-base housing, but you didn't own it. It wasn't yours. You were expected to care for it, but it wasn't really your home. When it came time to graduate, Vietnam War ended one day before I was commissioned, in other words, the day I was graduating. And I had a choice. I could either go active duty for a couple of years for a career or pursue my ambition to be a geologist. I thought about it a lot, and I listened to that advice about, okay, get used to it. You don't have a career, you're in the military, you're basically a tool. You will do as well as you can and as best as you can, but bear in mind the impact on the family is going to be significant. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take my chances and pursue my career as a geologist, go off to graduate school. I was offered the alternative to 2 years active duty. It was 90 days active duty for training, where basically I went through engineer basic course, and a potential obligation of 8 years in the reserves. So I took that route, to the disappointment of my instructors. About 5 years afterwards, I was called up for a local reserve unit, a engineering company, basically what's called a base map depot, where they stored topographic maps. And had a very interesting time, but I decided at the end of my 8-year obligation, bag it. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm going on to other things. When I moved from the D.C. area to Milwaukee many years later, the local representative from a engineer detachment actually called me with the hope that I would become part of their unit because of my engineering experience and also geologist experience. And I thought it was an intriguing possibility to get back into something that there was no war going on at the time, but also would expand my horizons. I realized in graduate school that there was more to life than geology. And the military provided a lot of that, more to life experiences. Bottom line, ended up going from one reserve unit to another and ended up volunteering to deploy prior to the beginning of the Gulf War to Saudi Arabia for what I thought would be a 90-day tour with the 416th ENCOM, Engineer Command, out of Chicago. And I had to give considerable thought about whether I was willing to do that or not because I had a lot of bitter experiences from the Vietnam era. Then I realized it was time to either put up or shut up because we were talking very serious considerations. Had we go to war with Iraq, there would be very serious repercussions if we lost. Specifically, if Iraq invaded Saudi Arabia or somehow cut off the Saudi oil supply, the western part of the world would be in very, very serious trouble. So I figured, okay, time to put the hand up, stand up. I volunteered, checked with my wife. We talked about it. She said, okay, fine. Got there, deployed shortly after Thanksgiving, 1990. And before the war started, my unit found out that we had been specifically targeted to be wiped out by what we referred to as a terrorist group because they weren't going to be wearing uniforms. What is more collectively known as a paramilitary unit. In other words, people that look like civilians would be actively hunting us in Saudi Arabia. And the impact of that was, at first, of course, it was quite terrifying. Because quite frankly, you never knew who was going to be the bad guy. And I was all over Dahran in Saudi Arabia in a civilian vehicle by myself. I had a Colt 45 for a weapon. They only gave me 14 bullets for the entire war. And you never know who the bad guy was going to be. The people I met were very friendly. They were very outgoing. They were glad to say hello because you were there. You were protecting them. But everybody who stepped up to me like that, for all I know, could have been out there to kill me. So it was very mind-numbing. And got to the point where it wasn't terrifying anymore because I figured if they were successful, quite frankly, it's very difficult to get out of a well-placed ambush. The odds of surviving an ambush is it's well thought out is next to nil. So in my mind, I was dead. I wasn't coming home. And amazingly to myself, I was a tremendous amount of peace as a result of all of that. It was you enjoyed every minute. You enjoyed having dinner with your friends. You enjoyed looking at the sunset, sunrise. The fact that you were still alive brought on a tremendous sense of peace. You enjoyed everything. But at the same time, the reason I had 14 bullets is because the military was shifting to Berettas at the time, which was Italian. Colt is American-made. Colt filed a lawsuit saying you can't switch to Berettas. So the military, in its infinite wisdom, decided to stop buying .45 ammunition and stop buying Berettas. We had Air Force units arriving everybody was equipped with a .45. They spent the entire war without a single bullet, which was very upsetting, quite frankly. It still makes me angry. But we finally got the word, okay, you guys aren't going home. You're here to stay indefinitely, which is one of the things they also told me to expect in the military. The law reads that you can be, if you go to war, you are there until 90 days after the war ends. So if we have a 20 or 30-year war, you could be in the war for 20 or 30 years, 40, 50 years. And then 90 days and you can finally be allowed to go home. So there was no going home after that. Many of us had expected the war to go on for years. We did not expect such a quick resolution of conflict. So we got used to it. And behavior changed. quite rapidly. You learned to play the what-if game, for me personally. What if somebody did this, tried to attack me this way? What if somebody did this, tried to attack me that way? You started to figure out what your response was going to be to keep you alive. A classic one was, what happens if the bad guy gets into your car or you're stopped for the stoplight? Well, bad guy is probably sitting in the passenger seat, probably has not buckled himself in. And if he tells you to just drive forward, take you out to the desert to kill you, okay, fine. Do what he says, take the car up to the maximum speed it goes and run into a concrete wall. Bad guys will go flying through the windshield. Kill them, not you. Little things like that just became matter of course. My unit survived the war. We didn't lose anybody, although you got used to figuring out who was who. When somebody follows you around in a civilian vehicle 5 times around the same block, the odds are, you got to watch out for this one. But, you got good at avoiding conflicts. You didn't step out of the car if you thought you were at risk. Anyway, at war's end, I found myself in Kuwait City as part of a Task Force Freedom, which was a military humanitarian task force designed to get Kuwait City moving again after the Iraqi occupation. I led a damage assessment team that was responsible for evaluating critical facilities, which is, my team was hospitals, telecommunication facilities, and supermarkets, to see what needed to be done to bring them back working again. And I found my experience avoiding the bad guy to be quite useful. When my team went out, I didn't think anybody was going to make it home because not all the Iraqis were gone. And I found myself being very good at avoiding a firefight. Example I'll give you, we'd get into a building, pretty much deserted building, and find a locked door to an office someplace. Okay, fine, now what do we do? And the initial impulse from one of my teammates, well, why don't we just shoot in the door? So, well, how do you know it's not some stranded civilian? Kill somebody completely innocent. And he asked, well, what are we going to do about it? I said, well, we're speaking English. We're going to speak here for a while, go away. Come back in about 5 minutes and see if the door's still locked. Sure enough, we do that. Door would be open, bad guy be gone. And we'd be hearing bullets going off all around the building. Obviously, the Saudis and Kuwaitis taking out the bad guys. Truth be known, there were a lot of them still left behind. Probably missed the ride out of town, etc., or didn't want to leave. And the Iraqis and Kuwaitis were taking them out. They were taking them out so often. We've talked about issuing deer tags for the set bag limits on these people, but we didn't have to do that. My team made it home. And while we were there, I found out that the Saudis had taken out a 12-person detachment coming ashore in Dhahran, just where we were, and killed all of them. And there's no doubt in my mind that we were who they were after. But again, we didn't lose anybody. Much to my surprise, all of us came home. Now, the problem with coming home is, as many veterans will probably tell you, surviving the war is the easy part. Coming home, mentally you don't come home for a long time. You're all of a sudden going from one moment to another living to cutting the lawn or doing the laundry, buying, going to a shopping center or maybe a movie. And it's difficult to retransition back to normal life. Many years later, I finally had an insight on the subject in terms of Homer's The Odyssey, which is a depiction of, it's the second oldest piece of Western literature written by Homer. The one preceding it was the Iliad. Describes how Homer runs into the Cyclops and the big monster on the cliff and the whirlpool, and his wife has dozens of suitors. And it occurred to me many years later that perhaps that what Homer was depicting was a description of what life was like after you get home. I started reading the Odyssey in more detail, and it reaffirmed it by pointing out that Odysseus and his crew left Troy, and they were traveling for about a week, and they got driven back to Troy. In other words, they were headed home and got driven back to the place where they were at war. Also, a lot of his crew members stopped in the land of what's called the lotus eaters, which is a mythical fruit. And those that ate it didn't want to go home anymore, which would tie in with our drunks and our drug addicts. You know, they come home and that's all they can do. They can't cope with it any other way. Also, nobody recognizes you. You don't even recognize yourself. You don't even recognize what home is. You know, you get so comfortable with being at war that war feels more natural than being not at war.
Big monster, I think, is pronounced Skila. I'm not sure the pronunciation. Is a big monster on the cliff that dives down and eats people as they pass by. And I think it's Catabetus is the whirlpool, where if you're not careful, your ship gets sunk into it. Well, Odysseus and his crew land on an island where inhabited by a person called Circe, and she advises Odysseus that he has to go into Hades, hell, to get advice on how to get home.
And he does this and gets advice from various people. And just before he leaves the island, Circe says, you must find a path between the monster on the cliff and the whirlpool. You must find a pathway to get home. Well, if you think, based on lots of experience, many vets either do one or two things when they get into emotional situations. They either tremendous outbursts of rage, the monster eats you up, or you withdraw into yourself, get sucked into the whirlpool, you withdraw. And that struck home to me of, like maybe this is what she was trying to convey.
The other character, obviously, I looked at closely was called Calypso, where Odysseus ended up stranded on an island for a number of years, and this very pretty lady wants him to stay there, will not let him go home. And I looked at it, and if you look at Calypso as typical behavior of vets, many people have been through trauma, you could look at Calypso as solace. Solace is what you seek when there is no end in sight to the trauma. It's not any kind of encouragement. It's simply, okay, live with it. And many people look for solace in different ways. Some people turn to drugs and alcohol when they just don't see any way out. Other people turn to suicide. Other people hide behind a desk. Other people seek out illicit relationships, if you want to call it that, or they simply totally withdraw. And once you get past that point where you can stop looking at it as there's no way of getting out of this, once you find some way past where you're stuck, then you can actually get home. Otherwise you become totally withdrawn into yourself, which is typically why many vets don't want to talk about it. They don't see any way to get past the pain.
And then, of course, you've got your relationship with your family. As I had to put it, Odysseus' wife, Penelope, had a lot of suitors. And based on my experience, everybody looks much better than the average combat vet when they come home to their spouses, their kids, and everybody else. But it's not just that your spouse might be looking at somebody else. It's every time you explode in anger at Christmas, or explode in anger at Easter or a birthday party, your spouse typically is remembering what you used to be. And you're not there anymore. So they get caught up, in my mind, they tend to get caught up in what used to be. They are taunted by the past. And I can understand why, because the present's not very pretty for many people. But once you can come to some understanding of why you behave the way you do, why do you do this, why do you do that, the more you get control over your life.
To give a practical example, I can think of, okay, in my hometown, the current place I live in, Milwaukee, we have two ways to get to the same place. One is a crowded street with plenty of stoplights, and another place is a very pleasant side street with a couple of stop signs and very little traffic. I always chose the crowded streets with stoplights. And for years, I said, why do you do this? It's much faster to go on the, side street. And it finally occurred to me, well, wait a minute. Side streets with stop signs are a perfect place for an ambush because they know where you're going to stop. Versus a crowded street with stoplights, you may not get stopped at the stoplight, and there's plenty of cars around you that'll take the bullets instead of you. Once I realized that, I was able to go on the side street.
Another example is when I came home, I had a very, very difficult time remembering people's names. It's just, you could say your name a dozen times, I still would not remember you. It doesn't matter who you are. And finally, it occurred to me, well, wait a minute. I was being hunted by the enemy. My assumption at the time was pretty much that they were just going to kill us. What if they had taken me captive? I knew very many high-level people within my organization. If they had taken me captive and tortured me, I might have been able to give them their names, who I was, where I could be expected to be found. In other words, they could con their way into the headquarters people that I dealt with, and many other units. So it was better not to remember people's names, and they were absolutely vital for me to remember.
Another example I can think of is when I came home, I also took up writing, and which led to a community theater involvement. And in one time, I was playing a role in Don Juan, where I was the reason why Don Juan got all the women. And part of my role was to get touchy-feely with a very, very beautiful young woman. And I just couldn't do it. I absolutely could not even come close to her. It wasn't that I was going to get gross or anything like that, but I couldn't even hug her. And it bothered me, like, why can't I do this?
And then it occurred to me, up until that point, I could not imagine myself wanting to get close to somebody I didn't love unless I was going to kill them. Now, this is totally ridiculous back when you're home, but your mind gets so caught up in being at war that everything gets overridden. After I realized that, I could hug a friend. I could shake hands without looking twice as to what their other hand is doing, because they might have been pulling a revolver. Before that, I couldn't. I felt it extremely difficult. But once I had that realization, once I understood why I was behaving the way I did, I could change, and change immediately. And I think that's true for a lot of vets. And they don't understand why they blow up. They don't understand why they withdraw. They don't understand why they behave the way they do. They don't understand why they don't like to go into places they've never been to before. And the reason being is it's an unfamiliar place for, the bad guys are waiting for you in there. You might get ambushed, which is ridiculous back here in the States. Not so in a combat situation. But I found more and more of, okay, this is why I do this. Then that gives you control. Now, one of the things I found that was also very helpful, and my wife encouraged me, was to start writing fiction. And I was initially going to write about the war. I only recently was able to do it. I chose the fiction I was going to write. I wrote short stories and disguised the war in them, like many authors do. Like, for example, Tolkien was a World War I vet. Rod Serling was a World War II vet. If you look at what they wrote and you look at what they discussed, you can see the influence of the war. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, he talks about the war, but he hardly even talks about what life was like after everybody came home.
There was no place for Baggins to come home to. He went off with the elves beyond because the land was not his anymore. He won the war, but the success was not his. I'm sure Tolkien felt the same way, but he barely discussed what it was like after the war. He gave hints about it. So I did the same thing. I talked about the war indirectly, writing fiction, poetry. I've since had fiction and poetry published in Taiwan, Japan, and the U.S. One of my stage plays is going to be produced in Iran by a combat vet for the Iran-Iraq War. One of my stage plays I adapted into a screenplay is being represented in the Chinese film industry.
And I found it very relieving because it allowed me a safe place to discuss a lot of the emotional issues that I couldn't talk about directly with anybody. Finally, that insight about the Odyssey being a poetic description of what life was like after Odysseus got home. It took me years to write, but I finally sat down and actually, for the first time, wrote directly about the war.
And it was tremendously relieving to be able to do that.
Who knows if it'll ever premiere, but at least I got it down.
It allows you to communicate to the outside world what your experiences are without having to talk to them directly. But it also allows you to pass it down to your children, your great-grandchildren. This is where your dad or your great-granddad came from. This is why he behaved the way he did.
You had mentioned you had a number of bitter experiences regarding Vietnam. I wanted to know if you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Oh, yes.
Good.
With regard to the bitter experiences regarding Vietnam, this is back in the hippie days, and I was not exactly a very popular person because I was in Army ROTC. Many people did not understand the fact that they too, assuming they were male, were probably going to end up in Vietnam at the time.
They did not fully comprehend that the people in ROTC were not all alike. Yes, we had ultra-conservative, ultra-liberal, everything in between, which was really amazing. But they all thought we were all alike. They thought we were all, as they called us, baby killers. It was a classic insult. You were constantly ostracized by the majority of the population if they knew you were in ROTC. If they didn't know, you were just accepted as a normal person. But the moment they found out you, oh my God, you're a baby killer. What are you doing in there? Why are you doing that? Why are you supporting this evil war? Aren't you out there to protest, et cetera, et cetera? And the moment you would say something, they would just walk away. They weren't interested. They were just...
And I think one of the most aggravating things about it is shortly after the war ended, I came back to campus to say hello to colleagues both from my geology department and Army Yards. The whole feeling of the campus changed. ROTC people were just normal people. Many people got into it for the college benefits, which was substantial. But there was no feeling of ostracism against somebody because they were in ROTC. That didn't matter. It felt like some of the people undoubtedly who called me a baby killer literally meant what they meant. Okay, that was their perception. But it felt like 99% of the ostracism was because they wanted to fit in with everybody else. They didn't really care what you thought. I don't think they knew what they thought. They were just parroting what everybody else was saying.
That's the feeling I got after the war, which just embittered me even more. If they were expressing honest opinions, that didn't bother me. What bothered me the most was, why aren't you willing to talk to me about this? They didn't do that. Very, very few people would actually have an open discussion with you. All the rest were just, the popular, hey, I smoke marijuana, I drink, free love, the whole 9 yards, and then 2 years later, everything changes. That left me embittered towards my own generation. And ironically, in the Gulf War, which I volunteered for, there was almost an apology. The people my age were saying, we're sorry, we support you. We don't fully understand what you're doing, but we support you completely, which was a total turnaround from the early 70s, late 60s. And to this day, I don't understand. Perhaps they were simply saying it because that's what everybody else was saying. Was it really honest? Did they really support us? And you came home afterwards after the war, and yes, you were greatly greeted, but many people you were completely ignored.
They forgot the war within a very short period of time afterwards. Many people, even some of the older vets, that wasn't even much of a war. What are you talking about? Which was very chastising, very unsupportive. He felt like the Korean War vets, the forgotten war, must have felt. Who cares about you? We fought the Great War. Now, that wasn't true for everybody. Not everybody did that, but it was another difficulty of coming home.
But Vietnam did not bother me when I was in the Gulf War because, again, it was either put up or shut up. I was asked to volunteer by my commanding general, thought about it for several months, and yeah, okay, this is it. I need to go. So I felt very comfortable there. Ironically, I was one of the most stable people there because I volunteered versus simply being caught up in a reserve unit that was, you're here, you signed on, get on the airplane. Me, I got on the airplane willingly.
What is a big sticking point right now as far as the Iraq War goes? Something that you still have issues to deal with?
Now, the Iraq War poses a vastly different dilemma for me versus Vietnam and the Gulf. I was against our invasion of Iraq because we went in for the wrong reasons, in my mind. Everybody pretty much knows the stated reasons that Iraq was being accused of having weapons of mass destruction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think most people understand that when you invade a place, you don't invade a country, you invade a people.
They don't look at you as just people. They look at you as a group that has come in and they see what you do. In my mind, had we bothered to put a 9-minute slideshow of what happened in Kuwait City during the Iraqi occupation, probably the entire planet would have invaded Iraq to get rid of Hussein and the Republican Guard. As I put it, the Iraqi occupation, Hitler was gentle in how he exterminated people. I won't go into great detail because it's improper to discuss what happened to those people outside. That culture does not talk about it, okay? But had we invaded because there was great evil being conducted against the Iraqi people themselves, not just Kuwait, but many of the people within Iraq, we were welcomed when we went across the border by many of the population. Who didn't want us there was the Republican Guard. And that's why it got ugly. But still, when you invade a population, you should have a reason for it other than just, well, this is my political goal.
This is why my political excuse to do something. Now, I know we invaded Iraq, probably not because of weapons of mass destruction, but because they posed a viable threat to the rest of the Middle East, the Saudis, the Iranians. Had they chosen to do so, they could have brought probably most of Western civilization down by simply cutting off the Saudi oil supply, Iranian oil supply, Kuwaiti supply. That is undoubtedly the real reason we invaded. Okay, I don't know that. I haven't read anything classified, et cetera, about the invasion reasons. But you must be upfront about that. And it still bothers me to this day. Had we bothered to say the real reason we would have gone in versus the stated reason why we went in. And I'll leave it at that.
Are the nightmares over or the flashbacks over, or are you still contend with them?
Oh, no, flashbacks are ongoing, nightmares are ongoing. They all have triggers. And they make sense to me, but the average public, they will not make sense to. What triggered that flashback? Well, sometimes I have to think about it, but something will bring it up. And everything from discussing what happened in Kuwait to what happened while we were being hunted, it'll bring on a series of flashbacks. They're inevitable. But you learn to cope with them. They just become a normal part of life. Some of them become quite humorous. I know very well if I see a burning tank downtown Milwaukee, the odds are it's not there. It's kind of a flash forward where your mind melds into previous events with today's events. If I walk into a room and everybody's dead on the floor, okay, wait a microsecond, they'll be fine.
Some of them, I still remember one time driving down a country road and having a bad day and seeing one of these warning signs where you see a pedestrian crossing on a warning sign. I saw somebody carrying a rocket-propelled grenade launcher on his back crossing the street, which is obviously wasn't the real world sign, but it was quite humorous interpretation of what life was like that day. Again, you don't just remember what happened in the past, you project it into what's now.
So if you feel threatened by your boss, or if you see somebody being evil towards somebody, you hear about somebody being beaten, robbed, etc., they'll tend to bring on flashbacks of what you saw in Kuwait.
Have you done anything like meditation or stuff like that, or encounter groups, or?
Yes, I have. And I've gotten better control over them. They're less likely to be triggered. And I think simply accepting them as normal, not fighting them, just accepting them as they're going to occur, it lessens the pain.
Because you're not trying to fight it. And as I put it, it's early on in ROTC, I was taught how to deal with pain. And the instructions were, okay, fine, treat pain like a screaming child, or a child that's trying to get your attention. If you ignore the child, it's just going to scream louder. If you ignore the pain, it'll get worse, because it's your body trying to send something to your mind saying, hey, we got a problem here. If you acknowledge the pain and say, yes, I understand there's an injury, here's how we're going to treat it, it's not fatal, etc., thank you for the message, it can actually go away. I've done that many, many times, even with severe burns. You know, you touch the hot iron on a stove or something like that, you know, and, oh my God, that hurts. And, okay, it's a burn, and it goes away. The pain does. If you treat the flashbacks the same way, where you simply try to ignore them, they will be absolutely overcoming. They will just trigger again and again and again and again. If you simply acknowledge them, they will occur, but they will not be as numerous or as painful. You know, that's what I have found.
So where are you today? What is life like for you today?
Oh, the flashbacks and nightmares have become a normal part of background. Everything I have read in the scientific literature indicates that the trauma of war actually does physical changes to your brain that don't go away. They're permanent. The feeling of war feels more normal is probably going to be with me for the rest of my life.
The feeling of walking into a building that I've never been to before and feeling awkward, fearful, directly impacts going into strange places in Kuwait, Saudi, having to meet people I've never met before. It's just normal. You can get greater control over it, but it's not going to go away. I still, you know, panhandler comes up to me on the street, okay? They're a panhandler. Everybody deals with them. But microseconds after they start to approach me, I know exactly how I'm going to kill them, which is totally ridiculous in Western society. But during the war, it made sense. You had to have some preemptive plan for if this guy that you are approaching, even if he's not paying attention to you, decide, you know, you've got to walk past him. You've got to have a plan of action as to what you're going to do, otherwise you don't survive. Unfortunately, that produces permanent changes to your brain. Obviously, I'm not going to go belting people down just because they come to shake my hand, okay? They don't know that I know exactly how I'm going to kill them. But that's simply that's not you're psychotic, it's simply your brain has changed. Your brain has altered where war is the norm. You know, you can come home, you can live normally. You know, you wouldn't even know that passes through my head. Nobody would. But it passes through many people's heads. The people coming home from Iraq, Afghanistan now, we didn't have the IEDs that they did. Okay? I can imagine somebody driving down the street and seeing a trash barrel in the corner, wondering if it's got an IED in it. Well, probably not. But it's going to go through their head. Okay? An abandoned car. It's going to go through their head that somebody might have an IED. They're not going to react like there's one there, but it's going to go through their head. It's simply part of the normal way of living now. Again, if you're not psychotic, you're not mentally ill. You're simply adapted to a lifestyle that you weren't adapted to before.